Angry Moderate, April 12th, 2012. April. Wasn't 3 weeks ago, didn't we have 80-degree temperatures? And now the last 3 weeks have been in the 40s and 50s? I guess we paid for that beautiful week with the last three. And since much of what I do in my work is outside, I'm wrapped up in blankets and a jacket, and I'm really uncomfortable. And Bob is delivering me some, what's his name, Bob?
Alan West, representative of Florida.
Alan West. Alan West.
Representative of Florida.
Awesome. Okay, so here we go. Angry Moderate, and this is fabulous. This makes me so happy. I cannot tell you. There's a representative from Florida named Alan West. I would imagine he is a Republican. So Alan West has reportedly been able to gather information, that irrefutable information, mind you, that there are 80-some-odd communists in Congress, and he's going to root them out one by one and make sure that there's no infiltration of the Red Menace. There is no Red Menace anymore. Who is this guy? Was it channeling Joe McCarthy? This is beyond insane. This must be an HBO special, right? Yeah, right. So it's all a joke, and it's just a TV show. And actually what this guy is doing is he's producing a reality TV show, which is actually a spoof. Like, what's his name? Joaquin Phoenix, who did the spoof of himself becoming a rap star. And then they filmed it, and then they came out and said, just kidding! We were just trying to make money. We're just trying to get more famous and make money. So Alan West, right, representative from Florida, has decided that there are 81 communists in Congress that must be rooted out. And here's all I have to say. I wish there were more communists in Congress. Do you hear that, Republicans? Do you hear that, Democrats? Going camera to camera. I wish there were more. Now, you might ask, the angry moderate, why a moderate would be in favor of more communism in Congress. Because communism, in our eyes, is associated with a leftist ideology, that if you are a communist, you must be ideologically way out on the left of the political spectrum. But I'm going to go beyond that paradigm. For those of you who don't know, that means like example. I'm going to go beyond that paradigm and just talk about communism as an ideal. The ideal that it's not such a bad idea to have a society in which the haves and the have-nots are not so hugely separated. The ideal that maybe you can have a democratic society that's not monolithic, that's not ruled with an iron fist like the Soviet Union was by Stalin and Lenin and a lot of those other ends, and that you could have a democratic republic that was also socialist in nature, where you had socialized medicine. And everybody out there who's either libertarian or on the right is saying socialized medicine. That's heretical heresy. We must find everybody who favors socialized medicine and put them somewhere far, far away. Now, let's just talk about this for a second. Socialized caffeine, right? We're all for socialized caffeine, right? I mean, even people on the right are like, yeah, as far as coffee goes, let's make it free for everybody. Everybody, free coffee, you know. But let's talk about this idea of socialized medicine or health care for everyone. I'm not going to sit here and toe this left-wing or Democrat Party line and say, health care is a human right. I'm not even going to play that game, because you want me to play that game, right? You want me to play that game, the game that puts me in a certain cubbyhole with regard to political ideology. I'm not going to play that game. I'm just going to talk about reality. So, you get people like Rush Limbaugh who say things like, so Rush Limbaugh says, for example, if you're pro-abortion, you're pro-murder. Okay. So then I say back to Mr. Limbaugh, Mr. Limbaugh, you oftentimes speak about this idea of freedom, that, for instance, you think that the health care bill the constitutional arguments against the health care bill that's been, kind of being debated by the Supreme Court, the arguments against it are that it's anti-freedom. In other words, it's Congress legislating who has to purchase what. It's Congress legislating commerce, and that is not constitutional. And you yourself said, Mr. Limbaugh, that Congress should not get in the business of legislating commerce, that it is unconstitutional, but more importantly, you said, it's against freedom, you said. We need to be free. Who is this state telling us what we have to do? Okay. So then I come back to you and I say, Rush, buddy, Rush, my friend, you are hiding behind the constitutional argument, and I'm going to catch you in an hypocrisy now. If I were to say to somebody who speaks from the position of being anti-abortion, and they say that abortion is murder, and then that same person says that they are opposed to the health care bill because it's anti-freedom, and I were to say to them, so you don't want to have socialized medicine, you don't want to have health care for everybody paid for by the state. Absolutely not. No, that's not the country we live in. We do not want to have health care paid by the state. We don't want to have state control of everything. We do not want to have the state legislating who has to purchase what. That's against freedom. And then I say to you, and what's your stance on abortion? And you say, I am pro-life. I believe that a life begins at conception and that abortion is murder. And I say to you, well, if we don't have health care available to everyone, and a woman does not get the prenatal health care that she needs in order for the child whom she is carrying to come into this world healthfully, isn't that also possibly a form of violence against the unborn? Couldn't you say that it's violence against the unborn to not provide proper health care paid for by the state for the woman who is bearing this child? No, it's totally different. Well, what about the death penalty? Didn't the state of Connecticut, the legislature, just vote to repeal the death penalty? Do you believe that the state should legislate when somebody dies? No, well, that person is guilty. When we talk about the unborn, we're talking about the innocent unborn. Well, so then when a woman is pregnant and she needs to get health care and she can't afford it, and the child whom she is bearing, the unborn child, suffers because of that, isn't that the fault of the state? Now, you're going to sit there out in television land and potentially find my diatribe, my those who might be caught in the hypocrisy, the pro-life hypocrisy. You might sit out there and say, ooh, Dan, you're pushing the envelope a little bit here. And you're darn right. I'm pushing the envelope. I'm pushing it right across the table to those people on the political right who are unwilling to recognize and admit their hypocrisy in this particular case. Yeah. Does the left have hypocrisies? Absolutely. Right? Angry moderate, not angry liberal, not angry socialist, and not angry communist, angry moderate. Now, back to this idea of communism and Alan Weston's claim that there are all of these progressive commies who need to be rooted out of Congress. I want there to be more people with a socialistic, communistic mindset who are running my country. Not from the perspective of taking over the world and doing so in a violent, totalitarian manner. Is that how we have often seen communism as an ideology played out on the world stage? Absolutely. Is that what we saw and have seen with places like North Korea and China and the Soviet Union and Albania? Absolutely. No argument from me there. Totalitarian states with a communist ideology. Do we also see totalitarian states with a non-communist ideology? Pinochet's Chile, Somoza's Nicaragua, These are countries that we, the United States, propped up, that we, the United States, gave money to, or to whom we gave money, better grammatical construction. These are countries who, just because they were non-communist, we supported them, and they were totalitarian dictatorships. They were dictatorships no different from the dictatorships of the Soviet bloc, no different from the dictatorships of the communist bloc. So the issue here is not communism. The issue here is totalitarianism. Let's be honest, for crying out loud. Let's at least have the courage to be, do you hear the train? To be honest. Why is the United States not invading Syria right now? Why is the United States not putting together an international, a coalition of the willing, as George Bush said, right? A coalition of the willing. Remember that with Iraq? A coalition of the willing, right? They were only willing because the United States said on the side, if you're not willing, we're going to cut off all foreign aid to you. Oh, we're willing, right? It's like Pee Wee Herman, right? They became willing pretty quickly when the United States threatened to cut off any kind of aid if they weren't part of the coalition of the willing. Why are we not putting together a coalition of the willing to invade Syria when it's pretty clear that the Syrian government is carrying out widespread atrocities against the population? And yet, why were we willing to do so in Iraq? Why are we not carrying out some kind of political and military operations in the Sudan? Because there's about to be a civil war bloodbath, and there has been an ongoing, terrible conflagration there with regard to suffering in human life. Why haven't we gotten involved there militarily? And yet we do get involved militarily in places like the Balkans, Serbia, in places like Afghanistan. Is it because one case is more morally compelling than the other? Well, the government, oftentimes in an effort to manipulate you and me, to get us behind their effort, might claim that there is a moral component to the action. Right? I mean, with Afghanistan and the Taliban. Did the Taliban and do the Taliban, do they treat women horribly? Absolutely. Have they done and undertaken terrible atrocities with regard to women in their society? Absolutely. Are there other countries in North Africa and in East Africa and the Horn of Africa and on the Arabian Peninsula that do the same thing? Absolutely. Have we invaded those countries? Absolutely not. These are choices that a government makes based upon what it considers to be the most important choices diplomatically and in terms of international hegemony, strategy, strategic orientation, global orientation, right? Read Zbigniew Brzezinski. He'll tell you what it is. What is it, The Great Chessboard, I think his book is called. You read it. Well, this is what we have to do here, and this is what we have to do here. Has nothing to do with morality or ethics. This is just what we're doing. So, back to this issue of communism, and Alan West, our gentleman from Florida, who has decided that it's important to purge all of these communists from Congress. I want people in my government body who are looking out for the little guy. I want that. I want legislators in my federal Congress, in my lawmaking body, who have a socialistic orientation. It doesn't have to do with ideology. It's not ideological. It's just about taking care of everybody. And contrary to what a lot of people on the right will say, we can't take care of everybody. Some people more than others, but we can. We are the wealthiest nation on the planet. We can. So, Alan West, I'm happy for you to come on the show. I would love to interview you, and let me go on record as saying that if you find more communists or socialists in our Congress, I say bravo for them, bravo for their ideals, bravo for the idea of trying to take care of the have-nots, and Shame on you for hiding behind ideology when really all you're doing is trying to get attention for yourself, capitalize on some anti-Obama fervor that may exist in your voting, with your voting constituency, 2, and 3, simply playing on sort of this new playground of fear that's being cultivated by the likes of Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh and all these folks on the right who have decided that our current leadership ideologically is no different from those communist elements, blah, 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 blah. Shame on you for being a hypocrite. Just tell the truth. Alan West, boy, I would have 100% respect for you if you came out and said, look, I just don't want there to be people in Congress who are looking out for the little guy. I don't like the idea of looking out for the little guy. I think this should be a libertarian country. Darwin's ideas of social, survival of the fittest, we call social Darwinism. If you just said that that's what you thought should prevail, I would say, all right. I don't agree with you, but at least you're willing to say it. But social Darwinists and those people out on the political right in particular hide behind things like ideology, hide behind things like constitutionality, hide behind all of these smoke screens, and they're just not willing to tell the truth. Anybody out there who heard my example about abortion and about how can you argue against state health care and be against a woman's right to choose, how can you make that argument? How can you make the argument that a woman should not be able to access prenatal health care, the best possible prenatal health care, for free, paid for by the state, if it means that the child whom she is bearing has a better chance of being healthy? I'm having trouble with the grammar here, but you see where I'm going, right? How can you make the argument, being pro-life and anti-abortion, saying that the innocent child must be protected at all costs, the innocent unborn child, and at the same time be against the health care bill and essentially arguing that no, not every woman should get the best possible, every pregnant woman should get the best possible prenatal care? You're a hypocrite, but you're not willing to admit it. If you're willing to admit it, come on my show. Come on my show. If you want to argue about it, come on my show. Happy to have you here. The angry moderate is willing to entertain all arguments. Coffee. I want to talk for a second about all of the uproar with regard to North Korea and its imminent satellite launch, which people are saying is actually a nuclear test, right? A test of a delivery system for a nuclear weapon. And I want to chime in also about Iran and Iran's supposed quest to gain a nuclear weapon. Now, I'm not going to sit here and make the argument that the right wing is saying that these countries are trying to gain nuclear weapons. I'm not going to argue against that. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, the right wing is being hyperbolic. Iran is really just cultivating its nuclear industry for purposes of energy. I'm not that naive, right? Do I think that Iran, under the auspices of a domestic nuclear program, but only a program for energy's sake, do I think that they're really trying to create a nuclear weapon? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think North Korea is trying to develop better delivery systems for its nuclear arsenal? Absolutely. Does it bother me? What, Dan? The fact that Iran could have a nuclear weapon doesn't bother you? But they could use that bomb to obliterate Israel. Let's think about this for a second, okay? Let's really consider this carefully. Let's put aside all of our nationalistic, all of our ideological presuppositions, and let's just look at this. And remember, the angry moderate's last name is Weintraub, right? The angry moderate is not anti-Israel. Are you with me here? The angry moderate believes in the existence of the state of Israel. The angry moderate is not some left-wing kook who thinks that Israel is a criminal state. The angry moderate is not Noam Chomsky, okay? I, as the angry moderate, speaking of himself in the third person, because what the heck, am middle of the road. I'm absolutely behind the existence of the state of Israel. No question about it. For many, many reasons. So let's dispense with this idea that my argument is somehow going to be anti-Israel, or is coming from an anti-Israel left-wing radical perspective. It's not. Okay. So why, Dan, are you in favor of Iran having a nuclear weapon? Well, I'm not jumping up and down excitedly about it, right? I'm not like, what was the movie there with Chris Farley, Jojo the Happy Circus Guy? I'm not thrilled about the idea of Iran having a nuclear weapon, but it doesn't freak me out. It doesn't frighten me. As a matter of fact, it doesn't strike me as necessarily being a negative, and here's why. Iran gets a hold of, or is able to create a nuclear weapon, and they're not going to use that nuclear weapon against Israel because it would mean their own destruction, right? They wouldn't go lobbing a nuclear weapon at Israel because it would mean their own destruction. Now, you're going to make the argument out there that any time there is another nuclear weapon in the world, that is inherently destabilizing. And I'm going to say that's not a bad argument. It's not a bad argument to say that any time there are more nukes in the world, there is more of a chance for there to be a destabilizing, it could have a destabilizing effect. But I'm also going to say that nukes that are controlled by governments, even fairly extreme governments like the Ahmadinejad government, even extreme governments, nukes that are controlled by governments are not going to be used by those governments because the governments, as I've said before, have self-interest. And the self-interest of government is to exist. Nobody wants to stop especially when you're the government, because you're in power and life is good. President Ahmadinejad probably lives in a really big house and probably eats really good food and drinks really good coffee. He probably has a pretty good existence which he doesn't want to destroy. How do you keep from destroying it? Well, you don't lob a nuclear weapon at someone and say, ha-ha, we've done our thing now, right? And then you get totally destroyed. And as you're about to be destroyed, you say, maybe that wasn't the best choice after all. There are those of you out there who are going to say, yes, but what if these nuclear weapons are captured by radical elements? By elements that are suicide bent on suicide in terms of the use of a nuclear device. And I'm going to say, it's not a bad argument. If that's the case, though, then why aren't we doing everything in our power militarily to go into Russia and make sure that all of those nukes that exist in Russia, all of those nukes that aren't necessarily under strict state control and that could be snagged by radical Chechen rebels, or that could be snagged by radical Islamic elements in Russia, or that could be sold somehow on the undermarkets of the world. Why aren't we going in there and doing something about that? Well, maybe we are. But no, we're targeting Iran not because they are developing a nuclear weapon. You know that, right? We're targeting Iran because this is part of our diplomatic strategy. Remember, during the George Bush presidency, Bush, Bush the little, right? Bush the second, right? Bush the minor. There was a new doctrine articulated. This was in the post-9/11 era. The doctrine was called the doctrine of preemption. Prior to that, there had been this thing called the doctrine of containment. There had been an American military and political doctrine to contain the spread of communism. And this doctrine of containment, all of our foreign policy was carried out to contain communism. Well, in the post-communist era, the doctrine of containment became anachronistic. It didn't matter. Why would you have a doctrine to contain communism when communism was no longer an issue, right? Post-1990, 1991. So there was this new doctrine articulated in the post-9/11 era called the doctrine of preemption. Preempt other countries and other groups of people from being able to ever attack the United States. And that's why you see foreign policy ventures and foreign, military ventures into places like the Arabian Peninsula, into Yemen with our drones, into Pakistan, into all of these parts of the world where there is fear that radical elements could somehow attack the United States, the Taliban, right? We preempt the Taliban attacking us by going into Afghanistan and blowing them to smithereens. Then let's take a look at Iran. We look at the situation in Iran and we say to ourselves, okay, is there a possibility that there could be another kind of radical Islamic takeover, like really extreme radical Islamic takeover of government, where some element could get a hold of a nuclear weapon and use it against us? Well, there's a remote possibility. But more to the point with regard to our foreign policy is the fear that Iran is going to use its power in that part of the world, in the Arabian Peninsula, in the Gulf of Hormuz, in the Middle East, to disrupt the flow of energy, oil, which would have a dramatic economic impact upon the United States. And it's that economic impact that U.S. policymakers are most fearful of. And so then the red herring, the diversion, the issue that's not really an issue that gets used by people in political circles is the nuclear issue. That's the argument that's made with regard to possible military action against a country like Iran. Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I mean, if the issue was about nukes, why haven't we already gone to war with Pakistan? Why haven't we already gone to war with India? Why haven't we... Bit of an exaggeration, but you get my point. The issue is not Iran developing a nuclear weapon. The issue is always coffee. In the end, the issue is always coffee. No, the issue is not a nuclear weapon. The issue is foreign policy that's dishonest. Is it okay that foreign policy is dishonest? I don't know. Boy, this is a very serious Angry Moderate show. A very, very heavy Angry Moderate show. I'm going to have to lighten this up. Should foreign policy be honorable and ethical? I don't know. I don't. Should the United States really be like Norway and Finland and Denmark, social democracy, a social democracy where everybody is taken care of? I don't know. The Angry Moderate must admit that I don't have the answer. I can't tell you the answer. I can tell you that in a recent poll, the happiest countries in the world, where the place where the people are the happiest, are Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Finland, social democracies, places where people are taken care of by the state, and that the United States, I think, came in 11th on the list of places where people are happiest. I would imagine, though, that if you interviewed a certain sample of people, that you could get a different result. But, maybe the way we're headed economically is the way it's supposed to be. I mean, maybe this is how history works. This is how society evolves. You begin with a noble experiment, the experiment of a democratic republic, the late 1700s, breaking away from our imperial bonds, breaking away from King George and the Brits who had held us in colonial servitude for many decades, and becoming independent, building a new and vibrant commonwealth, a new and vibrant constitutional democracy. And then maybe that gets a little bit tweaked into being less about the ideals of democracy and more about the idea that whoever can tweak the system to their own advantage can become wealthy, and that nobody should take away the ability for somebody to become incredibly wealthy. I mean, we saw that in the early 19th century in the United States, where you had business interests that used the idea of America being a free place, free for business, free to become as rich as one can become, and all of a sudden, over the course of generations. You see the evolution of a system in which an increasingly small group of people become increasingly wealthy and control the state, regardless of the democratic institutions that form the foundation, the political foundation of the state. And maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. Maybe we are supposed to move into our era of empire, just as the Romans moved into their era of empire after their republican era. Maybe that's just how societies evolve. Maybe it's better to live in a society, in a country that pretends to be a democracy, but that is extraordinarily wealthy, and where you have a few people who are trillionaires, and through their largesse and their generosity, the majority of us don't go hungry. Maybe that's the best system. Maybe it's foolish to think that as large a country as the United States, as large a nation as we are, with 300 plus million people, maybe it's silly to think that we can actually take care of everybody. Maybe social Darwinism has its place in a place like the United States. Maybe Allen West's rooting out of the communists in Congress makes great sense, because we fear any kind of threat to the American way that has evolved over the last 200 plus years. And when I say the American way, I do not mean the way of fairness and equality and communitarianness, as was envisaged by our founding fathers, the deists. But I mean the evolution of the American way as characterized by Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life, as characterized by Mitt Romney, the anti-intellectual who could very well become the next president of the United States, and only because he has deep pockets. Maybe that's just the price we have to pay for living in a country where the grocery store shelves are full. You walk up and down our grocery stores, and you walk up and down the cereal aisle with your children, and you say, "What's it going to be today, honey? Are we going to have the Fruit Loops or the Lucky Charms? Are we going to have the gluten-free cornflakes, or instead, are we going to have the nutty granola?" And we have many choices. And in a lot of countries, they have no choices. And maybe the price we pay for having those choices is living in a country where Mitt Romney, because of his wealth, could become president. Living in a country in which lobbyists and moneyed interests control the government. Living in a country in which the rule of law has long ago been superseded by the rule of men. Living in a country in which a man like Newt Gingrich can run for president not to become president, but just to enhance his ability to make more money during his next series of speaking engagements. I don't know. I do know that the Angry Moderate is going to take a break, and I'll be back in a second. See you in a second. Welcome back to this installment of The Angry Moderate. I want to talk about an interview that I heard on AM radio the other day, and it had to do with this guy named Bubba Watson, who won the Masters. And it was an interview on AM radio up here in the Upper Valley of New Hampshire and Vermont. And the person who was being interviewed had written a book about golf. And he had written a book about like 3 golfing heroes. Arnold Palmer, I think Sam Snead. I'm not much on golf. I got to be honest with you. Like, I think golf is, I don't totally, I mean, I get miniature golf. I love miniature golf, right? I mean, if you called me up and said you want to play in a miniature golf tournament, I'd be like, uh-huh, absolutely, because miniature golf is a beautiful game. Golf, I have trouble with golf. I have trouble with people who golf. I have trouble with the whole golf scene. I have trouble with the fact that caddies have been replaced by golf carts. So all the people who used to walk around like I did when I was, 10, 11, 12 years old, carrying the golf bags, remember the movie Caddyshack, and making a couple bucks, right? That doesn't exist anymore. So golf and I are not, we kind of are going our separate ways. But this book, in this interview, the interviewer asks the book writer about Tiger Woods, and everything that the guy who wrote the book, whose name I can't remember, it's unimportant, had to say about Tiger Woods was negative. Tiger Woods is egocentric. Tiger Woods, it's all about Tiger Woods. Just totally bad-mouthing the guy, right? Blasting Tiger Woods and holding on high this new bastion of golf, this great new Bubba Watson. Isn't he great? Isn't he kind? Isn't he just so refreshing? And I'm thinking, uh-huh. I love Tiger Woods, and I'm going to tell you why. I am so tired of people going after Tiger Woods. The guy is a human being. He's real. He's a real human being who has made real mistakes. He has and continues to try and figure out how to live his life. He has a temper. He goes out on the golf course, and when things don't work out, he swears. I don't mind at all. Would I take my son and daughter to go watch him play golf? Well, first of all, I hate golf, so no. Second of all, would I take my son and daughter to a place where I thought that they were going to be exposed to someone having a temper tantrum and throwing their, whatever, golf club, blah, 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 and swearing? I would think twice about it with my children being young. As they got older, I would say, you've heard those words before, probably. I liked John McEnroe. Did you like John McEnroe? I liked Jimmy Connors. I liked the fact that they were feisty and real. I liked that John McEnroe's marriage fell apart with Tatum O'Neal. I liked that Jimmy Connors and Chris Everett broke up because it's human. I mean, I didn't like the fact that he was suffering. Well, back then I didn't know any different, right? I was a teenager. I didn't get it. But the point is, he's human. Tiger Woods is human. I don't like watching these. I find it very unsettling when we celebrate these supposedly pristine role models. Why do we do that? Why do we look at people like Bubba Watson and say, oh my gosh, he's so great for the game. He's so great for the game. I mean, why? Now, you want me to play the race card here, don't you? You want me to say, there's something going on here with regard to race. And you know what? I think there probably is. I think there probably is. I think that probably a lot of folks in the golf world and in other parts of American society look at Tiger Woods and look at Bubba Watson and they see race. And it's an ugly thing, ain't it? It's an ugly thing that's part of our society. But we got to talk truthfully about it. We can't sit here and hide from this stuff, you guys. We can't sit here and pretend that this issue of race is not part of our national meta-dialogue, right? That underneath the surface, there's something going on with regard to race. Look, there's an issue in Sanford, Florida with regard to a death of a young African-American man shot by a white man. And there have been many protests and a lot of action and a lot of turmoil surrounding that issue. And there has been, on the political right, I know that I'm always harping on the political right, but I think that they need to be harped on more than the left. Sorry. The moderate believes that the right oftentimes has to bear the brunt of my critiques a little bit more than the left, because the right strikes me as, because they are in a position of power, as being more hypocritical because they are using their power to manipulate the population to see the world in a certain way. Anyway, in Sanford, Florida, you have this situation that has occurred. Don't know all of the facts. Don't know all of the facts. Then you have a large outpouring of frustration and anger on the part of many in the African American community. And you have protests and actions surrounding this. And if you listen to the diatribe on the part of the political right, the conservative establishment in the United States, there's not one conservative who has been able to transcend the issue of how these actions are taking place, how these protests are taking place, who is leading the protests in Sanford, Florida, what the tone is of the protests in Sanford, Florida. There's no ability to transcend that issue and to be able to say, look, we just don't know what happened. We want to know what happened. We want to know the truth. Instead, what you hear people say is, we're going to defend this guy Zimmerman because we don't like the way the African American community is responding to this particular issue. We have to be able to talk about this stuff. We have to be able to talk about the fact that Reverend Al Sharpton comes before the people in Sanford and speaks in a very powerful tone, and that tone, the way that takes place, the tone in which that takes place, alienates people, stylistically, alienates people, particularly in the middle and on the right, and that alienation, that stylistic alienation, becomes defensive and becomes a way to argue about in favor of the other side. That's something we need to be able to talk about. We have to be able to say, I'm uncomfortable with, if you're a conservative politician, I'm uncomfortable with the way in which these protests, the tone of I'm uncomfortable because it's alien to me, and yet that is separate from the issue. We have to be able to have that conversation. We have to be able to admit our racism. We have to be able to admit our difficulty in being able to relate to cultural differences that we all have, and not turn those into political or ideological differences. And I think that there is an issue with regard to race underlying the anti-Tiger Woods sentiment that seems pervasive in our society. And a lot of people would say, no, I'm not racist. I just think that Tiger Woods is arrogant. But aren't there other sports figures that you like who are also arrogant? Aren't there sports figures who you kind of say, wow, he's awesome, and maybe equally as arrogant? Well, I don't like Tiger Woods because clearly, he is an adulterer. But you voted for Newt Gingrich. He's an adulterer. I mean, are you willing to admit your hypocrisy? I think the bad-mouthing of Tiger Woods potentially has racial undertones. I'm willing to go out on that limb, to push that envelope across the table, and to open up that conversation. Are you? Come, we can talk about it. We can talk about it. I think that the bad-mouthing of Tiger Woods is disproportionate based upon racial undertones. I think that the man who wrote the book about Sam Snead and about Arnold Palmer, and there's one other guy who I can't remember, and in this interview continually destroyed Tiger Woods. I think that there are racial undertones to these conversations. I think that there are racial undertones. I hope I'm wrong. But I'm willing to have the conversation because the angry moderate is not willing to shy away from issues that may be controversial. We've got to be able to have that conversation in the United States. We have to be able to have that conversation. The left and the right have to be able to have that conversation. If we don't have that conversation, what are we doing? What are we doing? We are hiding behind all kinds of defense mechanisms as a way to push each other away, and then we use ideology as our argument, when in fact, oftentimes ideology has nothing to do with it. It's just stylistic. It's cultural. It's the fact that we have difficulty relating to each other, and all of a sudden that becomes something that must be politicized. We need to be able to have that conversation. On the same, like in the same vein, in the same kind of universe of issues, is this issue of art and life. I talked about this once before. I challenged women who were watching the show to recognize that Woody Allen, whom they may see as being disgusting in life, because he married 70 years old, he married his stepdaughter who's 30. To see Woody Allen as a brilliant artist, and also as someone whose female characters in his movies are actually very powerful. And not to look at Woody Allen in his personal life and say, ew, and then turn around and say, and I hate his movies. They are not one and the same necessarily. You can look at the art and you can look at the human being with different lenses. For me, Mel Gibson. Look, Weintraub, right? Weintraub. The angry moderate is Jewish. Mel Gibson is a self-avowed and proven anti-Semite. And from what I understand, his father's like was like a professional anti-Semite, right? I mean, Mel Gibson may be an amateur or semi-pro. Anyway. So you would possibly think that I would then say Mel Gibson in terms of movies? No way, hate the guy. Can't stand him. Yeah, but what about, no, anti-Semite, won't do it. Love Braveheart. Love Lethal Weapon. I think Mel Gibson is a really, really entertaining actor. I love his facial expressions, right? I love it after that scene in Lethal Weapon when he's like, has just jumped off of the building and, and he's like, I'm hungry. I need to get some lunch. I could watch that over and over again. I think he's great. Love the Road Warrior movies. Right? I really like him as an actor. As a human being, not so savory. His movies? Yeah. If you were to tell me I could only take 10 movies with me to a desert island, one of them would be his. Yeah. Now, would I take Citizen Kane with me to the island for a year? You go to the desert island, right? Going to a desert island for a year. You can only take 10 movies for the whole year. Which 10 are you going to take? Well, right, you write this, like let's say you're single, right? And you're writing this in your Match.com. 10 movies that I would take with me because you're trying to impress somebody out there. Someone who's going to, Citizen Kane, Touch of Evil with Orson Welles. You want to sound intellectual. Back to the Future, right? Yeah. Groundhog Day. I would take a Mel Gibson movie. One of those movies would be, Going to the Desert Island would be a Mel Gibson movie. So I think that the issues there's a similarity here. Obviously, the Tiger Woods issue, the bashing of Tiger Woods by this golf writer, and my being Jewish and still liking Mel Gibson are not the same issue. But I think they fall under a similar basic umbrella. And that umbrella is, let's be honest. Let's be honest. If you are going to bash Tiger Woods because he's supposedly all about himself and he's arrogant and he is too temperamental, then you need to bash everybody who falls under that same umbrella. You need to bash every golfer who falls under that same umbrella. It would be hypocritical not to. It would be dishonest not to. So it's raining. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's raining. And me working in an outdoor industry and having to be outside in about an hour and a half, I'm having a moment of sadness. But I'll get over it because I have coffee. And coffee makes the world go round. Anyway, it's a very, very serious Angry Moderate show. Very serious Angry Moderate. The Angry Moderate, me, really probably should change, I should probably change the name of the show. The show should be more about, let's just be honest about this stuff. Let's be honest about our foreign policy. Let's sit down and say, yeah, you know, our foreign policy is totally not amoral. I'm not saying our foreign policy is amoral, but we undertake our foreign policy not for ethical and moral reasons. We undertake it for the betterment of the United States. So to hide behind ethical and moral arguments, to hide behind the argument that we invaded Afghanistan to save the women of Afghanistan, to hide behind all of it's dishonest. Like, let's just step out from behind that curtain and say, look, we undertake our foreign policy to make sure that the United States is the richest and freest and least liable to be attacked as is possible. And yes, it's going to be very contradictory. We're going to support dictators and prop up dictators just because they like us. You know, a dictator calls us on the phone and says, I really like the United States, and I'm going to give you all the oil you want. And yeah, I'm a dictator, that's true. I'm a terrible, terrible guy, and I put lots of people in prison, but you love me because I'm going to give you stuff. And the United States says, we do. Yes, you are a dictator, and yes, we can't really publicize all the bad things you do because it'll make us look really hypocritical, but we will give you stuff in return. Let's just step out from behind the curtain and say it. Why aren't we attacking Syria? Why did we attack Iraq? Why did we prop up Pinochet's Chile? Why did we prop up Somoza's Nicaragua and go after the Sandinistas? Come on, right? Let's step out from behind the curtain and talk about the underlying tones of race that still exist in our society, that still exist in our society. That the arguments and the conflict that has arisen with regard to the situation in Sanford, Florida, with the death of that young man, and the now being accused of murder of another young man, and the protests surrounding that issue, and the reaction to the protests. Let's step out from behind that curtain and talk about how race plays a part in that. Can somebody be honest out there on the political right and say, you know what, I don't like listening to Al Sharpton speak because it makes me uncomfortable? Can someone on the political right step out from behind that curtain and say, when a civil rights leader gives an impassioned speech about civil rights and about this, for example, this situation in Florida, it makes stylistically, and even from the perspective, whatever, it makes me feel uncomfortable. Can someone step out from and just, let's have that national dialogue? Well, we can't get anywhere with regard to these issues if we're not going to have that dialogue and be honest about those particular things. So this has been a rather heavy Angry Moderate show. And as I said, I think, you know, maybe the name of the show is a misnomer. Maybe the show should be more about not moderation or ideological predisposition. Maybe it should be more about, you know, let's just talk truth here, right? Let's talk truth. If you're going to be pro-life, then you better be able to explain honestly why it is you're against the Obama health care plan. Because the Obama health care plan would take care of women who are pregnant, and that would also protect the lives of unborn children. If you came on the Angry Moderate show and you sat there and you said, I just don't support it because I don't want my money being taken away from me, I would say, thank you for stepping out from behind the curtain. Thank you for at least having the courage to sit here and say that. But it seems to me that we're not willing to do that. And I know that I harp more on the political right. I think the same is true for people on the left. People on the left are not willing to admit that fundamentally, at a fundamental level, they may have discomfort with regard to issues of race. There may be people on the left, men in particular, people on the left who are intellectually completely fine with lesbian and gay life. And yet there may be a discomfort that people on the left have with the gay community. Let's have that conversation. Because if we don't have that conversation, the whole thing becomes kind of a charade. And all of a sudden we get into this big political turmoil about stuff, and we're not talking about the real, true issue. I do think that in Congress, oftentimes there is this extraordinary politicization of stylistic issues. And that when somebody stands up and gives a speech and it's a very impassioned speech, and they do it in a certain stylistic manner, that other people just turn right off because the style preempts being able to hear the issues and what policies are being promoted. Well, the Angry Moderate has pretty much made a very important point today. I hope that you have listened, actually. Usually I say, what are you doing? How come why are you watching this show? Go outside and do something else. What are you watching me babble on for an hour? What are you doing with your time? But I think that this show makes an important point, and I'm tying everything together. Let's step out from behind that curtain and have the honest conversation. Let's not politicize things that don't need to be politicized. Let's not say that communists need to be rooted out of Congress when it's not about ideology. It's about the fact that some people want to keep their stuff for themselves. And some people want to get hold of that stuff. Let's have that conversation. Angry Moderate signing off. I will be back later in the month of April to continue on my Babble Fest, but thanks for listening. You see that spit comes out of my mouth when I get all frothy? That's gross. Anyway, Angry Moderate, peace.